Welcome back to Hopeful Horizon, where we bring you stories that touch the heart and challenge perceptions. Today, we're honored to share a story about respect, resilience, and the quiet strength of a forgotten hero. It begins with Colonel Harris, a retired veteran, who's turned away from an event meant to honor the very sacrifices he's made. But what starts as a moment of indignity transforms into a powerful journey as one man's quiet stand ripples out to change an entire community's perspective on honoring those who served. Stay with us as we explore this inspiring tale of dignity, unity, and a remarkable legacy that defies appearances. If you're drawn to stories of courage, change, and the impact one person can make, be sure to let us know in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe and click the bell so you'll always catch our latest stories that inspire and move you. Let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from our Hopeful Horizon family. The soft glow of morning sunlight spilled through the curtains of Colonel William Harris's modest home, illuminating the walls adorned with military memorabilia, photographs, medals, and framed certificates that stood as quiet reminders of a life defined by duty, sacrifice, and honor. Colonel Harris, a dignified man in his 70s, began his morning ritual with the precision of a military routine. He brewed a pot of coffee, straightened the few magazines on the coffee table, and meticulously brushed off his old dress blues. The annual Veterans Gala was a prestigious affair held at the city's grandest hotel, meant to honor men and women like him. Colonel Harris didn't attend often, preferring quiet days and simple acts of remembrance over grand gestures. But this year, he'd received a personal invitation from the Foundation's board. He'd hesitated at first, feeling a touch of discomfort at the attention, but his granddaughter Emily had encouraged him, insisting that his presence there was more than deserved. Dressed in his perfectly pressed dress blues, the colonel took one last look in the mirror. His uniform, though a bit worn, displayed his medals with understated pride. With a sigh that held decades of memories, he nodded to his reflection and made his way to the gala. The grand hall was a sight to behold, its chandeliers sparkling overhead, casting glimmers of light on the polished marble floors and velvet-covered chairs. As Colonel Harris entered the hotel lobby, he was met by a young woman at the reception desk. Her eyes flickered over him briefly, her smile polite, but somewhat dismissive. "Hello, sir. Are you here for the gala?" she asked, not making direct eye contact. "Yes, I am," Colonel Harris replied in his steady, quiet voice, handing over his invitation. She scanned it without much interest, nodding perfunctorily. The Veterans Gala is being held in the grand ballroom upstairs. As he made his way to the ballroom, Colonel Harris couldn't help but feel a strange sense of distance in the air. The attendees he passed were dressed in designer suits, gowns, and perfectly polished shoes. Their attire gleamed with a pristine elegance that seemed at odds with his own. He found himself at the doors of the ballroom, where an organizer, young, sharp-suited, and with an air of self-importance, stood clipboard in hand. "Yes?" The organizer looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Good evening," the colonel said, offering a nod. "I'm Colonel William Harris. I received an invitation to the gala." The organizer's gaze traveled over the colonel's attire, from the slightly faded insignia on his jacket to his worn shoes. There was a brief flash of judgment in his eyes before he shook his head. "This event is reserved for distinguished veterans," he said flatly, his tone as icy as his expression. Colonel Harris blinked, taken aback. "I assure you, young man, I was personally invited." "Yes, I'm sure," the organizer replied with a tight smile, his tone dripping with condescension. "But we do have standards for this evening, Colonel. We don't want just anyone off the street wandering in." A flash of anger surged through the colonel, but he held it back, his posture remaining calm and dignified. He stood there, his expression betraying nothing but a quiet dignity. For a moment, he wanted to argue, to show this young man exactly who he was and what he had accomplished, but then he thought better of it. He had fought wars and lost friends. This was nothing compared to the sacrifices he and his comrades had made. No matter how bitter the taste, he swallowed it, maintaining his composure. "Very well," he said, his voice level. "Thank you for your time." Without another word, he turned on his heel and left. As he made his way back through the opulent hotel lobby, his heart weighed heavy with a mix of disappointment and hurt. The invitation in his hand felt hollow. a reminder of the chasm between intention and action. He had been dismissed, his service reduced to a misjudged appearance, and his honor ignored. His phone rang as he reached his car. It was his granddaughter, Emily. "Grandpa, how was the gala?" she asked, her voice bright and eager. Colonel Harris hesitated. "I decided not to stay," he replied, forcing a calmness into his tone. Emily, sensing something off, pressed him further. "Why? You were so excited to go." There was a pause, and Colonel Harris felt his throat tighten. "It just wasn't what I expected, sweetheart." Emily, quiet for a moment, responded softly, "Well, maybe it's for the best. Let's talk tomorrow, Grandpa. I want to hear everything." The next morning, Colonel Harris was sitting at his small dining table, absently stirring his coffee, when he heard a knock on the door. Emily, his granddaughter, let herself in. She wore a determined expression, her journalist's notebook tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Grandpa," she greeted him, pouring herself a cup of coffee before sitting across from him. "Now, tell me, what really happened last night?" Colonel Harris took a deep breath, his gaze settling on his coffee as he recounted the events of the previous evening. He spoke of the dismissive organizer, the coldness of the staff, and the embarrassment of being turned away. Emily listened intently, her face growing red with anger. "How dare they?" she exclaimed. "You're one of the most decorated veterans in this town, and they turned you away because of—" "What? Your clothes?" "It's all right, Emily," he said gently, trying to soothe her. "I've faced worse, and there are others who faced far more than I have." But Emily wasn't convinced. "This isn't just about you, Grandpa. It's about how veterans like you are treated. If the Foundation is only interested in appearances, then people need to know about it." Colonel Harris hesitated. The last thing he wanted was a spectacle. But he knew his granddaughter's passion for justice and her determination to ensure that her community respected the sacrifices of veterans. After a moment, he nodded. "I just don't want this to be about me," he said finally. "If you write anything, make it about respect, about honoring everyone who served, not just the ones who fit a certain image." Emily nodded, her eyes gleaming with conviction. "I'll make sure of it, Grandpa." Within hours, her article was live, titled "A Decorated Veteran Dismissed, a Gala's Oversight, and a City's Reflection." She detailed not just her grandfather's service, but the unspoken pride and dignity of veterans often overlooked by society. Her words struck a chord, and by evening, the article had gone viral, sparking outrage across the city. Social media was ablaze with comments from community members and veterans organizations, each sharing stories of similar dismissals, rallying behind Colonel Harris as a symbol of respect for all veterans. The Foundation, unprepared for the backlash, was forced to respond. The board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting, with their public relations team scrambling to draft statements and reach out to veterans groups. Emily watched it all unfold with satisfaction, knowing she had given her grandfather and countless others a voice. Later that night, Colonel Harris received a call from one of the Foundation's board members, offering a personal apology and an invitation to a private meeting. They wanted to honor him in a special ceremony to make amends. But the Colonel's response was calm and resolute. "If you're truly sorry," he told them, "then we should meet. But it won't be just me. I'll be bringing others with me, veterans from all walks of life. If you want to make amends, honor us all." The board member, caught off guard by his request, hesitated but finally agreed. They arranged for a gathering that would include the Colonel and his fellow veterans, unaware of the profound impact that single meeting would bring. Colonel Harris took a steady breath as he glanced around the spacious, elegant ballroom prepared by the Foundation for a private reception in his honor. Sunlight filtered through the grand windows, casting soft beams onto the polished floors and chandeliers, which sparkled with anticipation. Despite the grandeur, Harris found himself focusing on his companions. Standing around him were the men and women he had personally invited, fellow veterans he had served alongside or met over the years, many of whom carried scars, both visible and hidden. Some wore dress uniforms, medals carefully pinned to their chests. Others had chosen modest attire, bearing perhaps a single medal or lapel pin, symbolizing their service. Wheelchairs and canes were scattered among the group, and the soft hum of quiet conversation filled the air as the veterans greeted one another with nods, handshakes, and occasional embraces. As they entered, Colonel Harris noticed the Foundation's board members on the far side of the room, gathered near the makeshift stage. Their formal attire and carefully neutral expressions betrayed the tension in the room. They glanced at the veterans with a mixture of discomfort and surprise, seemingly unprepared for the diversity of appearances and experiences. The chairperson, a well-dressed man in his 50s named Robert Avery, cleared his throat as he approached Harris, offering a tight smile. "Colonel Harris, thank you for accepting our invitation to this event. We want to express our sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding and honor your service." Harris's gaze was steady, his voice calm yet firm. Mr. Avery, thank you for organizing this, but I didn't come here for apologies. I came here for my friends, those who have sacrificed, often with little recognition." Avery's eyes darted over the assembled veterans, clearly unsure of how to respond. Harris took a step forward, his voice rising slightly as he began to address both the board and the veterans around him. "These men and women you see here today, each one has given a part of themselves to serve this country," he said, gesturing toward his companions. "Some served in combat, others in support roles. Some of them received medals, others didn't, though their sacrifices are just as profound." A hush fell over the room as one veteran, a woman with short, cropped gray hair and a slight limp, stepped forward. Her voice was steady but carried a hint of defiance. "I may not look like what some imagine when they think of a distinguished veteran," she said, her eyes scanning the board members, "but I served my time, put my life on the line, and sacrificed just as much." Another veteran, a younger man with a prosthetic leg, spoke up. "I came back from deployment missing a part of myself, but I never let it stop me from serving my community. We don't need to fit into a box to deserve respect." One by one, the veterans began to share their stories. The ballroom filled with voices recounting experiences of loyalty, sacrifice, and resilience. Avery and the other board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing the depth of their oversight. Finally, Colonel Harris turned back to the board. "We're not here for fanfare," he said. "We're here because we want real change. These events shouldn't be about appearances or status. They should be about honoring every individual who has given their time and heart to this country." Avery cleared his throat, visibly rattled. "We understand, Colonel Harris. What would you suggest?" The colonel's response was firm but respectful. "Establish a fund for veterans who need support. Host inclusive events that celebrate all veterans, regardless of background or rank. Let's honor the reality of service, not just the image." A quiet murmur rippled through the board members. Some looked doubtful, while others nodded thoughtfully. Avery met Harris's gaze, clearly struggling with his own discomfort. "We'll consider your proposal, Colonel," Avery replied, his voice laced with hesitation. Harris nodded, sensing the tension but hopeful that they had made an impact. The veterans, united and empowered by their collective voice, stood resolute. As they filed out of the ballroom, Harris felt a newfound sense of purpose. He didn't need an apology. He wanted change for every veteran who had served, regardless of the uniform they wore or the medals they carried. Months passed, and Colonel Harris carried on with his quiet life, unsure if the Foundation would truly make any meaningful changes. The veterans who had attended the reception with him continued to keep in touch, exchanging letters and phone calls filled with a sense of camaraderie. Then, one day, a letter arrived at his doorstep. The Foundation, it stated, was launching a new initiative inspired by Harris's words. They were establishing a fund for veterans in need and planning a revamped annual gala. But most striking of all was the name of the event, the Colonel Harris Veterans Gala. On the night of the new gala, Colonel Harris felt a quiet sense of pride as he entered the familiar venue. This time, he was greeted with warmth and respect by the staff, who ushered him inside with smiles and handshakes. As he made his way through the room, he was joined by the same veterans he had invited to the reception. Their smiles and nods spoke volumes. They, too, felt the impact of the changes he had inspired. The ballroom was transformed, no longer a place of rigid formality, but instead a vibrant space where veterans of all backgrounds mingled freely. Decorations included tributes to veterans' stories, from photographs to letters and mementos donated by families. A live band played softly, creating an atmosphere of celebration rather than ceremony. Emily, his granddaughter, was there as well, camera in hand, capturing the moments for her publication. She beamed with pride as she saw her grandfather surrounded by those who respected and valued him. Near the stage, Robert Avery and the board members stood ready to address the crowd. This time, their expressions were genuine, marked by respect and humility. When Avery took the microphone, his voice carried a newfound sincerity. "Tonight, we celebrate more than just an event," he began. "We celebrate the contributions and sacrifices of every veteran, regardless of their background, rank, or appearance. This initiative, inspired by Colonel Harris, aims to create a future where all veterans receive the recognition they deserve." The audience erupted in applause as Avery turned toward Harris, inviting him to the stage. With measured steps, Harris approached the microphone, his heart full. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying through the hall, "not for honoring me, but for honoring every individual here tonight. It's not about titles or medals. It's about the spirit of service, the sacrifices we make, and the unity we find in one another." The crowd listened in rapt attention as he continued. "In my years of service, I've learned that respect and honor are not confined to those who look the part or fit a certain image. They belong to each one of us, regardless of where we come from or what we wear." Harris's words resonated deeply, and as he finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Tears glistened in Emily's eyes as she watched her grandfather standing tall, his presence commanding the respect he had earned through decades of quiet service. As the evening progressed, the foundation announced the Colonel Harris Fund, dedicated to providing scholarships for veterans' families and financial support for struggling veterans. They also unveiled a display that honored veteran stories, a tribute that would become a permanent part of the gala. Harris spent the rest of the evening mingling with friends, family, and fellow veterans, his heart full of pride and contentment. He knew that this event was more than just a celebration. It was a step toward a future where veterans were honored for who they were, not just what they had done. As the night drew to a close, Emily approached him, capturing a final photo of him standing among his friends. "Grandpa, you did it," she whispered, her voice full of admiration. Harris smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "No, Emily, we did it together." As he looked around the room, he saw a community transformed by understanding and respect. For the first time in years, he felt that his quiet stand had led to something truly meaningful, a legacy that would honor not just his service, but the spirit of every veteran who had walked the same path. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey through Colonel Harris's story of respect, community, and change. His experience reminds us that sometimes a single stand can resonate far beyond the moment, bringing unity and hope to many. It's about seeing value in every individual, honoring those who serve, and building a legacy of respect that endures. If this story has touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. And make sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss another story that inspires, uplifts, and challenges perspectives. We'll be back with more stories that remind us of the strength we each hold within. Until then, stay hopeful, stay connected, and remember that true honor transcends appearances. Thank you for being part of Hopeful Horizon.